How's it going, fellow Spare Parts Army? I'm a former average US infantryman and Iraq war veteran named Chris Cappy. Today's episode, we're looking at whether or not the legendary Uzi actually deserves all of the love and affection that it gets in the military world. In order to fully understand the Uzi, I had to take it out for a test drive and experience its capabilities for myself. It seems like we finally found a gun where I can actually handle its recoil. Truly nothing motivates me more than going full send with this gun. This is the most famous and recognizable submachine gun in the world, due to it being simple to operate and easy to tear apart, as well as inexpensive to manufacture and create. The Israeli-born Uzi became a surprise, runaway, massive commercial success, with it being exported far and wide around the world. This thing sold like a gold record. No, literally, they made gold versions of it because gangsters have great taste and aesthetics for their weapons. In this video, we're going to examine if the Uzi is actually as amazing as its reputation suggests. We're going to find out why it quickly made the Israeli military famous. And at the end of the video, we're going to look at the future developments that promise to stop this weapon from fading into obscurity. Fire off a round at that like and subscribe button, and let's move out, Spare Parts Army. The tale of the Uzi begins in 1948 with the Israeli Defense Forces, and they had to solve one huge problem. They badly needed uniform weapons in their arsenal. They were still in their infancy at the time, right? Dealing with logistical problems for finding a single set of primary small arms. This was the early ragtag rascal Israeli army that we're talking about here. The IDF turned to Lieutenant Uziel Gal, who was an Israeli of German descent. His family escaped to Israel following the atrocities of World War II. His family and friends called him by his nickname, Uzi. Little did they know it would one day go on to become a household name. I wish I could make a weapon based on my nickname, Cappy. It would definitely end up being on the cursed guns list like immediately. But Uziel Gal actually never wanted his name to be associated with the firearm that he designed. So humble. Sorry, Mr. Gal, looks like you have to be world famous. You can't always get what you want. But it wasn't a straight line to success for this man. When Uziel Gal first moved to Israel from Germany, before he ever joined the IDF, he settled in a town called Kibbutz Yegar, and it was still under British control at the time. In 1943, he was arrested for a misunderstanding with a firearm that he was carrying, and so the Brits sentenced him to 6 years in prison. Not cool. But Mr. Gal took those lemons and he squeezed them into lemonade, because while he was incarcerated, he made good use of his time by reading everything he could about weapons to fully understand how they could be improved. I like to think that there's someone incarcerated out there right now learning about weapons from this channel, getting ready to invent the next primary weapon for the US Army. While he was reading all those firearms books, you gotta wonder if Uziel Gal came across a chapter about the Czechoslovakian ZK-476 weapon, which many people who have eyes and common sense believe that the Uzi is based on. Josef Koki and Francesc Koki created the prototype Z746 in 1946. The Uzi uses the same mechanics as that experimental prototype weapon. The ZK-476 was never adopted by the Czechoslovakian military. Clearly a huge missed opportunity for them, given how successful the Uzi ended up being. This is like the equivalent of Will Smith passing on being in the Matrix so that he could be in the Wild Wild West flop instead. I actually like the look of this rejected ZK-476 more. With its cool wooden grip on the front, it must be frustrating for your invention to be used in another country, and it's more successful there. So as soon as Uziel Gal got out of prison in Israel, he enlisted in the IDF and took an officer's course. He immediately started working on the development of a submachine gun. In 1951, the Uzi was officially adopted by the Israeli Defense Forces. It was then handed out to the Israeli Army Special Forces units as a combat weapon for commando missions. By 1956, it was the military's standard issue submachine gun. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion chose the Uzi as the standard issue submachine gun for the IDF. It represented a breakaway from the technology of its time, because before the Uzi, you had the submachine guns that were much longer and heavier. Today, the Uzi might not be anything incredibly spectacular, sure, but in the 1950s, for a while, it was the king of small caliber submachine guns. It caught on like wildfire, being adopted by 90 different countries for their military or law enforcement use. You even had unlicensed copies being created in China with the Model 320. That's how you know you finally made it, when everyone is creating clones of your product. This was basically a machine gun pistol that you could toss a stock on for added stability. When I test fired the Uzi at the Heritage Guild in Pennsylvania, I understood why people loved it so much. It felt like less recoil than the MP5, firing it was smooth as silk. Sure, there was a bunch of misfires and jams, but I used that as an opportunity to learn how to clear malfunctions. The weapon is kind of notorious for these stoppages. If the parts aren't straight from the IWI manufacturing plant, or if you use hollow point or the wrong kind of ammo, you're gonna have a bad day with this firearm. I don't know if it's because the chamber is so dang large that it can't help but eat up all the errant brass, or if it gets stuck in there for other reasons. It could be because the Uzi that we fired had been put through a lot of rounds over the years. But when it works, it feels great to fire. Soldiers would ideally use this for close range, indoors environments, or to clear out trenches and urban streets. The original design takes a 25 or 32 round 9mm magazine. You load it by slapping the mag into the pistol grip, which is another distinguishing feature that makes it different from, say, your MP5 submachine gun. The Uzi uses a simple open bolt blowback design. It fires in semi or full send mode. I found that the charging handle on the top of the weapon makes it easy to operate with either hand. And that piece doesn't reciprocate when firing. It has a cutout in the middle of the knob on the top so that it doesn't get in the way when you're viewing down the iron sights. The two-stage safety on the thing is actually kind of a little bit annoying. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of a grip safety that's attached to the handle of the weapon, which needs to be engaged in order to fire. But I could certainly be alone with that because it's a feature on the 1911 and many other very popular weapons. For me, I like to have to worry about only one safety. The Uzi has a decent rate of fire at 600 rounds per minute with a high muzzle velocity of 1,300 feet per second or 400 meters per second. It has a barrel length of 10 inches and a total weight of 7.72 pounds, which is heavy considering its size. Like most weapons in its category, the max effective range is only 100 meters, which really limits the firearm to urban close-up warfare. You might have noticed I'm firing one of the earlier style production models of the Uzi here. It's got a heavier wooden stock. Later on, they became fitted with a collapsible metal stock. Call me old-fashioned, but I like a good wooden stock every now and again. I also like a magazine release located near my finger, but the Uzi thinks differently. The Uzi likes its mag release located on the lower part of the pistol grip, which means I have to use my other hand to reload it. The open bolt design helps with cooling the system off between when you're going to go full send and no send. The downside to having this system is it leaves the bolt open and vulnerable to sand getting in there. It uses the same telescoping bolt design of wrapping the bolt around the barrel that we also used on the 1911 pistol. This allows the Uzi to be much shorter than other submachine guns of the time, like the MP40. It's basically an automatic pistol unless you slap on a stock, then that's what gives you that submachine gun category. The weapon is made out of stamped sheet metal, which made it easy to slam these things out, which is very important for Israel when it first was getting on its feet because they weren't exactly a rich country at the time. In 1958, Mr. Uziel Gal, the creator, was the first person to receive the Israeli Security Award by the Prime Minister for his work on the weapon. Total sales between its creation and the end of 2001 total over $2 billion for the IWI. They had been made in over 90 different countries who were clamoring for the Uzi at one point. This was no small thing for the newly emerged country of Israel, who was in a bad need of an inflow of foreign cash at the time. The money helped improve their military. You had the Secret Service and other high-speed, low-drag, cool guys wanting the weapon because it was so small and compact, perfect for pulling out of your Armani suit. But the interesting thing about the Uzi isn't that it was just used by special forces. It was also handed out to all your clerks, your admin types, your military drivers. They also found it to be the perfect personal defense weapon for their purposes. To name just a few militaries that used it, you had the Royal Netherlands Army, the German Armed Forces tank crews used it, and just about every dude in Miami who could hold a piece of metal sideways in the 1980s was armed with dual wielding these things. The soldier's perspective on the Uzi is that it filled the gap. When you wanted no recoil, but you also wanted to be able to stick this thing in your skinny jeans, you needed the Uzi. And there really wasn't another solution as cheap or compact out there. In the military world, the Uzi was being phased out of frontline service by the IDF in the 1980s. So the heavy weight, the annoying safety, the unergonomic magazine release, poor accuracy, these are all reasons as to why the weapon was phased out and replaced. This is old 1950s technology. I think the reason it became so famous is because it wasn't the best weapon to do what it did, but it was one of the first weapons to do what it did. So by that time in the 1980s, you really only had your reserve units using it in the IDF. The real reason why the IDF tossed the Uzi out was because of the widespread use of the M16. The M16 truly made a lot of submachine guns seem obsolete to an extent, because you could fire a low recoil rifle caliber with a weapon that weighed about the same as some of those submachine guns. The IDF began using the M16 instead of the Uzi. But what's being done now to keep the 65-year-old Uzi relevant into the future? How can we squeeze a little more juice out of this legacy? In 2003, IWI created the Uzi Pro pistol as an upgraded version, made out of your modern polymer materials with advanced firearms features. The engineers basically looked at a long list of complaints about the original Uzi, and they set to work trying to fix everything while keeping what people loved. The weapon had been transformed so that it now had a Picatinny rail on the top and bottom, as is tradition. It uses a closed bolt system for increased accuracy. They made the magazine release within the pistol grip for faster operations. Unlike any other Uzi variant, the Uzi pistol has a side charging handle rather than a top charging handle, and has a 3-stage safety. Just in case you thought the 2-stage safety was annoying, well, let's toss another one on there for fun. What happened to no safeties? What happened to this is my safety? So it looks like the Uzi is going to continue to be used, especially in a law enforcement role, for the foreseeable future. Thank you for watching, I really appreciate it. I'm your host, Chris Cappy. Remember, we have new video content coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. If you have a chance, check out this video on Lebanon's army. I think you guys might like it, and I'll see you guys very soon.